Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will be going over the history and geography of Beijing in China. Beijing is, of course, the capital of China, and the whole city center is this very large area here. It does get a bit mountainous around the edges here and a little bit more rural. But the majority of this region is very bustling, modern city. In fact, Beijing is the most populous capital city in the world at about 21 million people. And the name Beijing means northern capital. Almost all of its names that it's had over the years have meant the capital city to some extent or another. And the city is stuffed full of history, so much. So I think we should start with the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So let me grab my tablet over here and slide it into focus. Here we go. Starting off with the Peking Man site at Zhaokojian. Now, Peking is kind of an old-timey term for Beijing that the British gave the city. Kind of like the various cities in India that have their historic British colonial names. And then the names that they call them today, the British called the city Peking. And yes, that's where Peking duck comes from. But let's read about Peking Man. The name is kind of stuck to him. Scientific work at the site, which lies 42 kilometers southwest of Beijing, is still underway. So far, it has led to the discovery of the remains of, Samanthropus pekingensis, who lived in the Middle Pleistocene, along with various objects and remains of Homo sapiens sapiens dating as far back as 18,000 to 11,000 BCE. The site is not only an exceptional reminder of the prehistorical human societies of the Asian continent, but also illustrates the process of evolution. So we'll take a look at the actual site where these fossils have been found. You can see some pictures of them here, along with a cool statue of what he would have looked like. But yeah, we'll touch on him in history, so just hold on to Peking Man for just a second. Next, we have the Summer Palace, an imperial garden in Beijing. The Summer Palace in Beijing, first built in 1750, largely destroyed in the War of 1860, which we'll talk about, and restored on its original foundations in 1886, is a masterpiece of Chinese landscape garden design. The natural landscape of hills and open water is combined with artificial features such as pavilions, hills, palaces, temples, and bridges to form a harmonious ensemble of outstanding aesthetic value. So yes, this was a palace used, I believe, just primarily during the Qing dynasty. I don't think it was around during the Ming. If it was, what year was it built again? Hold on. 17, yeah, so the Qing dynasty, which of course we'll talk about in history, about the various dynasties that ruled over Beijing. But it is a very luxurious ancient Chinese palace. Very typical, I think, but very beautiful how it's built on the lakeside. Because of course it's the summer palace, so it needs to be breezy and light and beautiful. Next, we have, the Temple of Heaven, an imperial sacrificial altar in Beijing. The Temple of Heaven, founded in the first half of the 15th century, is a dignified complex of fine cult buildings set in gardens and surrounded by historic pine woods. In its overall layout and that of its individual buildings, it symbolizes the relationship between earth and heaven, the human world and God's world, which stands at the heart of Chinese cosmogony, and also the special role played by the emperors within that relationship. So this was a temple that the emperor would visit on the winter solstice and on New Year's. And it was believed that the emperor had a direct line to the heavens from this temple. So it's a very sacred spot, lots of dragons. That's the symbol of the emperor. And yeah, I think we'll take a look at this on Google Earth. I'll tell you a bit about Google Earth and Beijing in a minute. I kind of have beef with it, but yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. Next, we have the Beijing Central Axis, a building ensemble exhibiting the ideal order of the Chinese capital, and this was added this year in 2024. Running north to south through the heart of historical Beijing, the Central Axis consists of former imperial palaces and gardens, sacrificial structures, and ceremonial and public buildings. Together they bear testimony to the evolution of the city and exhibits evidence of the imperial dynastic system and urban planning traditions of China. The location, layout, urban pattern, roads, and design showcase the ideal capital city as prescribed in the Caogongji, an ancient text known as the Book of Diverse Crafts. The area between two parallel rivers has been settled for about 3,000 years, but the Central Axis itself originated during the Yuan dynasty that established the capital Dadu in the northern part. The property also features later historical structures built during the Ming dynasty and improved during the Qing dynasty. So this is really the heart of Beijing. This is where you're going to find just so many different important structures. Let's see, we've got the Hall of Prayer, the Altar of Land and Grain, and the Worship Hall, the Drum Tower, and old bells there. There's just many, far too many different structures, old and new. You can see the National Museum of China is here. Sadly, we're not going to look at that on Google Earth because the pictures are rotten. Here is Mao Zedong's mausoleum is there. Many of the beautiful gates leading into the Forbidden City, which we'll talk about in a minute. Just like within like this, I want to say it's a city block, but it's like, think like Central Park size, the Central Axis, and it's just full of all of these important ancient buildings. It's pretty awesome, I think. It's like if you need a history tour of Beijing, you just go here and you don't need to go anywhere else. Then we have the imperial palaces of the Ming and Qing dynasties in Beijing and Shenyang. So, of course, we're only talking about the ones in Beijing. I think this one mostly talks about the ones in Shenyang. So it says, there we go. The seat of supreme power for over 5 centuries, the Forbidden City in Beijing, with its landscaped gardens and many buildings, whose nearly 10,000 rooms contain furniture and works of art, constitutes a priceless testimony to Chinese civilization during the Ming and Qing dynasties. I think the rest of this just talks about palaces in Shenyang. But yeah, there's the dragon again. Some protective lions outside. And of course we'll look at the Forbidden City on Google Earth. We might have a hard time doing it, but we certainly will try. Then we have the imperial tombs of the Ming and Qing dynasties, not just their houses, but their eternal resting houses. It represents the addition of 3 imperial tombs in the Qing dynasty and listening to the Ming tombs inscribed in 2000 and 2003. The 3 imperial tombs of the Qing dynasty in Liaoning province include the Yongling tomb, the Fuling tomb, and the Xiaoling tomb, all built in the 17th century, constructed for the founding emperors of the Qing dynasty and their ancestors. The tombs follow the precepts of traditional Chinese geomancy and feng shui theory. They feature rich decorations of stone statues and carvings and tiles with dragon motifs, illustrating the development of the funerary architecture of the Qing dynasty. The 3 tomb complexes and their numerous edifices combine traditions inherited from previous dynasties and new features of Manchu civilization. Yeah, I'm not sure which ones of these are in Beijing, but they kind of have a similar structure of like an outer hall building, which leads to the actual tomb building, and that leads to like resting places of important people to that emperor, like servants and concubines and their wives and all of that, in their own special burial place. The Great Wall, iconic. Everyone knows the Great Wall of China. In circa 220 BCE, under Qin Shi Huang, sections of earlier fortifications were joined together to form a united defense system against invasions from the north. Construction continued up to the Ming Dynasty, when the Great Wall became the world's largest military structure. Its historic and strategic importance is matched only by its architectural significance. Of course, we'll look at this on Google Earth. I think Google Earth has, out of all of Beijing, the Great Wall pictures are the best. And we'll talk about it in history, but the parts of the wall that are in Beijing were built by the Ming, so they are the newest parts of the wall. So most of the time when you see like very iconic pictures of the Great Wall of China, like if you close your eyes and picture the Great Wall of China, you're thinking of the Ming part of the wall because it was built, thousands of years ago at first, and those walls are barely there. If they're still there, they're just kind of crumbled. So when you think of the Great Wall, you're thinking of the Ming edition, which we'll talk about in history. Lastly, we have the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal is a vast waterway system in the northeastern and central eastern plains of China, running from Beijing in the north, where we are today, to Zhejiang province in the south. Constructed in sections from the 5th century BCE onwards, it was conceived as a unified means of communication for the empire for the first time in the 7th century CE in the Sui dynasty. This led to a series of gigantic construction sites, creating the world's largest and most extensive civil engineering project prior to the Industrial Revolution. It formed the backbone of the empire's inland communication system, transporting grain and strategic raw materials, and supplying rice to feed the population. By the 13th century, it consisted of more than 2,000 kilometers of artificial waterways, linking 5 of China's main river basins. It has played an important role in ensuring the country's economic prosperity and stability, and is still in use today as a major means of communication. The Grand Canal ends its northern terminus in Beijing, this huge waterway linking most of China together. Really impressive project that many hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives to construct, but has been absolutely crucial to China's history, because China is a very big place, and it's important to link as many places together. Back when they didn't have cars, they didn't have quick ways to get news to or from, to transport goods. It was really the only way. So very, very important to China's history. Let's start off talking about Peking Man. I promised you more Peking Man content. So he was a Homo erectus. I think we've only found his skull, but we have found, I've done it, archaeologists have found other bits of Homo erectus, and like it said, also Homo sapiens, which is us. Homo erectus being a very early human, right? Not a human like us. They had like a brow ridge, like where our eyebrows are, there's a bone there, That's one of the major differences between them. They're also a lot smaller. but it's believed that Peking man lived in this area between 230,000 and 250,000 years ago. That is almost unbelievable, inconceivable to imagine that long ago. But that is how long human life has been around in this corner of the world. Pretty impressive. And of course, there were many early humans who lived here as well. If you want to know actually more details about that time and various other eras in Beijing's history, tomorrow I'm going to have a whisper video for you about Beijing's history. So be sure to subscribe so you won't miss out. The city that we know today really began in the year 1045 BCE, when it was known as Jicheng, and it was a walled city. And it was in the time of Jicheng that the Grand Canal would have reached the city, linking it to the rest of the cities around the Grand Canal. In 1122, it was conquered by the Jurchen, who were a Manchu people from up north there in a region called Manchuria. Hence the name. They changed the name to Zhongdu, which again is a capital city name. All but one of the city's names mean capital city, and I'll let you know which one it is. The Jurchen control of this region would not last for very long, because in 1213, Genghis Khan himself would come through and destroy the city, completely flatten it, as Genghis Khan tended to do. The city was later rebuilt by his grandson, Kublai Khan, who created, like it said before, the city of Dadu, which just means capital city. And he laid the framework for places, like I mentioned, the Beijing Central Axis, the Forbidden City. It wasn't the same layout as it is now, but the way it is now was built on the framework of Dadu, built by Kublai Khan. He started the Yuan dynasty and ruled from what's now Beijing. And probably the most famous aspect of this time that most people know is that Marco Polo came here and was kind of held against his will and forced to work for Kublai Khan for a couple decades before he bought his freedom. And Marco Polo went back to Europe with all kinds of tales, not just about his adventures to China and back, but about how impressive this city was, because it really was for its time. I think at the time it was the largest and most populated city in the world, and would hold that title probably until the Industrial Revolution, when London picked up cities like that. The Yuan dynasty was probably the shortest dynasty to rule over what's now Beijing. They were conquered in a revolution in 1368, and that began the Ming dynasty. And the Ming really set the actual framework for what Beijing is today. They completed the Forbidden City in 1420. And like I said, they added on to the Great Wall, which you can actually see on this map. You can see little bits of Great Wall along there and over here as well. I like that the map added the Great Wall in there in its own little way. It's really cute. But yeah, they extended the Great Wall of China out toward Beijing. And of course, the Great Wall of China was built way, way back to keep out invaders from the north. I guess unsuccessful if Genghis Khan managed to come through and flatten it. But yeah, that was the plan for the Great Wall, and I think it did actually work in some parts of China. In 1644, the capital city would be taken over once again by the Manchus, once again from Manchuria, and they began the Qing dynasty. Oh, I forgot to mention the Mings would have called it Beijing, northern capital. But anyway, they kept the name. It means northern capital. And the Qing did things a little differently. I think they were a little bit more extravagant than the Ming. And a lot of them were a lot more hands-on politically than the Ming in general. They actually, very interestingly, decided to allow foreigners into China, and in 1652 allowed a Catholic church to be built in Beijing. Pretty sure it's still around today, still functioning. Yeah, it should be, if I remember my research. 1860, we mentioned before how the British burned down the Summer Palace. And why was that? Why did they burn it down? Well, Britain and China were going through a rough patch because, of course, the Qing are more friendly toward outside forces, right? Allowing more trade. China was selling a lot of things to Britain, but they didn't really want to buy much. There wasn't anything they needed. China invented everything that we know, like paper and fireworks, gunpowder, some of the more famous, the compass, more famous Chinese inventions, right? So China had a lot of stuff to sell to Britain, but not a lot of stuff to buy from Britain. So Britain's like, well, we're just going to sell drugs. Like just straight up drugs. We're going to sell opium to the Chinese and get them addicted and make them want to buy more and more and more, which is what happened. So the emperor declared opium illegal. The British took offense to this, and that started the Opium Wars. So 1860 was during the Second Opium War when they invaded and burned down the Summer Palace to make a statement, I suppose. It would work eventually. But Britain never had control over this part of China. Southern China's a different story. We'll talk about Shanghai and things like that, but Hong Kong and things like that. But not Beijing. Not long after that, in 1900, was the Battle of Beijing during the Boxer Rebellion. Another uprising from the populace, which would eventually fail, but it was a very large, very destructive battle. They were going after mainly the foreigners that had been welcomed into Beijing, all of the Christians, Europeans, just anyone that was Western. They had to barricade themselves inside their churches and their own district they had for all the embassies, and had to defend themselves, and it did not go very well for those foreigners, fortunately. But the Boxer Rebellion would eventually be put down not long after that. But this was the last days of ancient Beijing. It would all come to an abrupt end in 1911 with the Xinhai Revolution, which took over the government and declared the emperor to be obsolete. They removed him from power, which at the time the emperor was like 7 years old. So they were like, look, you can stay in the palace, but you're not in power anymore. I mean, he wasn't ever in power. He was a little kid. He did not understand political power yet. But they just let him stay there for a couple decades till he was in his 20s, and they kicked him out. But it was the beginning of modernization in Beijing and the rest of China. They would eventually move the capital to Nanjing in 1928, which meant Beijing was no longer the northern capital, so they changed the name to Beiping, which I didn't actually look up what Beiping means, but I doubt that it means anything to do with the capital because they'd moved to the capital. Beijing was also the site of a very important event in Chinese history. In July 1937, this is where the Marco Polo Bridge incident occurred, which was a sort of kind of misunderstanding between the Japanese and the Chinese. So a few years earlier, I think in 1933, 1932, Japan had invaded Manchuria, where the Manchus came from, right? And were occupying it. And they're slowly making their presence known further and further south. So they were stationed around Beijing, and one soldier had gone out for the night. They couldn't find him. The soldier said that he got lost because he was sick. That probably is not what happened. You can imagine what soldiers wander off their bases to do at night. But they couldn't find him. And so they said, Chinese, you have to let us in to find him. And the Chinese were like, no, we don't want you in our city. it escalated too much. Shots were fired, and essentially that sparked the full-blown Japanese invasion of China, which was the beginning of World War II in Asia, and leading to, gosh, we're not even going to get into the atrocities committed during that time in China. But yeah, I didn't realize it had happened up here in Beijing, but that was what kicked it off. I learned that in my research. It's like I knew most of the history of Beijing. That was one thing I didn't know. China, of course, would be changed forever during and after World War II, mainly in the form of communism. In 1949, the People's Liberation Army took over Beijing, which was, of course, led by Mao Zedong. He stood up at Tiananmen Square. I think he was like on the gate of the Forbidden City, and he announced there the creation of the People's Republic of China. And, of course, Beijing would become its capital again, so he changed the name back to Beijing, which it still is today. Tiananmen Square saw many, many events. Many different movements. I think beginning in 1966, which was when the Cultural Revolution began, which was this concept to remove as much modernization as possible from China, try to get rid of the old ways of China. And I've mentioned this before on my channel, but the story at least. My landlady, when I lived in the Bay Area of California, was Chinese. And she told me that at this time, she was really into advanced mathematics. She was 16 in high school, and she loved trigonometry and calculus. Like, she loved all of the very, very advanced mathematics, and she wanted to study to be a mathematician. She loved it. But when the Cultural Revolution came, she was removed from her home, moved to the countryside, and was forced to work as a farmer. So she told me she never got to go to college because of the Cultural Revolution. That's how extreme we're talking about. The Red Guard, right? The Red Guard, yeah, no, yes, the Red Guard, yes, the Red Guard took over, going home to home. And, yeah, very destructive time in China's history. I think it really set it back, obviously. There were large protests in Tiananmen Square in 1976 to end it, and it worked. The more famous protest that I think everyone knows about was in 1989. You know, the image of the guy standing in front of the tank. That was an anti-communist movement, and as much as China wouldn't want to admit it, I think that worked too, because throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s, China started taking steps back from communism. Today, I think they're communist only in name, like many other communist countries around the world. North Korea is just right over there, by the way. There it is. That's a good example, too. Not communist, but they call themselves that, in a way. So, China's far more capitalist now than they'd like to admit. That could probably get me thrown in jail in China if I said that. But, I mean, if you look at the numbers on paper, it's very true. Beijing became extremely modernized during this time, the 1990s, 2000s, and in fact, Beijing hosted 2 Olympics in 2008 and 2022, the only place in the world to host a summer and winter Olympics. And that is where we are in history today. I feel like Beijing is mostly known for its pollution, all of that rampant construction and modernization, adding all the cars and everything, created some very thick smog that was toxic. And Beijing, especially at the start of their planning for the Olympics in 2008, has been trying to scale that back. And I believe today it is far more scaled back than it was 20 years ago, but still not great. And I think that's where I'll end the history portion for today. Why don't we hop over to the tablet and I'll show you what nonsense is going on Google Earth in Beijing. Here we are in Beijing, China. You can see the big borders here. And you can see the mountainous areas I told you about. But let's start by zooming out so you can see exactly where we are in the world. China's a big place. You may not know where Beijing is located exactly, and that's okay. We're going to find out right now. So here's big, beautiful China. Beijing is up in the north. I think Beijing means northern capital, right? So it is in the north of China. If you ever need to look for it, just look up here in this northern corner. This is the Manchurian area. Manchuria. That we mentioned a lot. And yeah, Korean Peninsula is over here. Russia's just up there. Mongolia is just over there. And that's where Beijing's located. Not on the coast also. Don't look on the coastline. For Beijing, you won't find it. It's more inland. So, first thing that we notice from above is you can see the Forbidden City right here. It is called that because the regular folk were not allowed to enter. Let me turn off the everything filter real quick so we don't see all these roads. There we go. Not allowed to enter. Only, the emperor, his family, and his servants, who were all eunuchs, were allowed to enter. You can see the large gates here leading into Tiananmen Square down here. Along with, we'll look at all this later. Let's start with the Forbidden City. Now, here's the thing. I know China does not have Google, so I'm sure it's hard to geotag places. It would be hard to geotag places in America on Chinese websites, right? But do you think the Department of Motor Vehicles is right here? Do you really think that? No, it's not. It is not in this courtyard. That's not true. And there are lots of restaurants tagged in here. Of course, they're not appearing. I think I need the everything filter on to see all. And sure, it's a museum now. So I'd get why, there'd be restaurants. Is there really a restaurant in? Isn't this the throne room? Is there a restaurant in there? And I understand it's a very large place. So I guess, but the toilet's tagged. Okay. And then now over here, do you think that there's a Quickie Mart right there? Because I don't think so. I could see maybe tucked into a building somewhere there'd be a convenience store where you might need to buy little knickknacks, maybe some disposable cameras, some snacks for the kids, is there really a noodle shop right there? But then when you tap on the pictures, I think this is a bad example. No, because see, look, there's the gate. Some beautiful kites there. I can see a restaurant or two, but that's a lot. Do you think there's a bus stop right there? What's this say? This is another restaurant. Maybe they have food carts that come here regularly. Little food trucks that would come out. Because there's a lot of restaurants in this pavilion. Do you really think the Chinese Tea Institute is right here? I don't think so. I don't know. So there's a couple areas that we're not going to look at just because they're so poorly geotagged. And I get that, China does not have Google. One of the very few places in the world that does not have Google. See, the actual museum tag is over here. Maybe that is the museum for the Forbidden City, because the Forbidden City is now one giant museum. But there it is. All beautiful, and it's magnificent, magnificent splendor. So stunning. There's just I imagine that if you tour Beijing, you would need a day for the Forbidden City. This would be your activity. There's the throne and everything. Just to explore this entire complex. It is so unbelievably large. and I know I say this every time we talk about Chinese history, but the film The Last Emperor is a really good film, really kind of dated, because they're all speaking English. That's kind of weird, but it was made in the 80s, and that was normal to do. But the Chinese government actually allowed them to film in the Forbidden City. It's the story of Puyi, literally the last emperor I mentioned who was a little kid. They filmed in the Forbidden City. So all those Forbidden City shots are actual Forbidden City places, filming in the actual rooms where those events happened. And I think that is so amazing. So amazing. Because you know China's so particular about representation, you know. There are a lot of tags for Tiananmen Square. Let's try this one. It's mostly just palace shots, I think. Oh, that's really neat. You can see this is the axis that they talk about, right? All of the big important buildings in this area. You can see Mao Zedong is still hung proudly up on the walls there. A monument there to the People's Army. Some more traditional buildings there. All traditional, like European, British style. That's a good shot of, you know, everything around it. Because we also have the mausoleum right here. There's some pretty good pictures where Mao Zedong has been laid to rest. It's a statue for that. Statue there. A bust of him there, all in beautiful gold. And the beautiful manicured lawns around it. It says thumbs up. Oh, is that the line to get in? That's outrageous, and it looks hot. I'm sure it's very humid there. Little trolley cars. Well, I think it's just a bus trying to look like a trolley car. I don't know, is it a trolley? All lit up at night. And not terrible pictures, right? They're in Tiananmen Square. I think, if I remember my research, Tiananmen Square is the world's largest public square. I think. Unless it's, oops. I hate this new feature they've done, the projects. No, thank you. Please go back. Please. Oh my gosh. Thank you. This new feature, they just put like big old pins everywhere, and you can't, if I zoomed out, all you'd see are these pins, and I'm not about to do that. But, see, here's the Museum of China, which I guess I'll show you. I don't think the pictures are that great, but the soldiers there. Yes, I think it's just mostly buildings or pictures of the building. But there's a couple of cool artifacts. This guy's really happy. He's got his foot sticking out. A big old smile on his face. Very gentle looking. I want to say Kuan Yin maybe? Or maybe just a Buddha. I'm not sure. Some more recent statues there. Oh, and this guy. That's a really neat face. Really cool. So, I think over here is where I want to take you next. Let me look at all of these streets. It is so busy. There we go. I think it was over here at this lake area. I want to say. But now, of course, none of the lake names are popping up. Because I need to show you one in particular. Oh my goodness. This isn't helping at all. Maybe it was over here. Oh boy. But, this isn't helpful at all. My family was recently over for Thanksgiving, and one of my family members used to teach English in Beijing. And so I had asked her if there's one spot I should show everyone on my channel, what should it be? And she said this lake area was her favorite spot to go. But why is nothing coming up? I mean, this isn't going to be helpful. Come on. Like, do you really think the children's hospital's right there? I don't think so. Anyway, why is nothing coming up? Yeah, Beihai. That was the, let's look at this botanical park. She said you have to check out Beihai. That's what it was. There we go. Beautiful lakeside pictures. This is what I'm talking about. More ancient structures. You can see looks like a stupa right there. Buddhist stupa. Yeah, really pretty area, isn't it? And this is apparently her favorite spot in all of Beijing. So I can understand why. It is so lovely. That was a really good slideshow. I'm glad I found that. So we also have to check out the zoo. And normally, I don't show you zoos on the channel. I try not to. I love animals. But I try not to show you. I try to show you historical sites, right? Not zoos. But the Beijing Zoo is special for one thing, and that is, of course, the pandas. The Chinese government owns every panda in the world. And if you see a panda outside of China, it is on lease. And China can take it back at any moment they want to. So there's a polar bear. We want to see panda bears. There's a beautiful tiger, panda bears. So the best place to come see panda bears is the Beijing Zoo. I'm sure many zoos in China have pandas, but this is the best place. A sweet elephant. And a rhino. Zebras. Rhinos. But yeah, this is the place to be to see pandas. Lastly, in the city proper, and again, there are so many, look how the city is ridiculously big. There are so many other things to see in the city, and I'd highly encourage you to poke around, and if you find any cool sites, let me know and I'll check them out too. But we're going to look at the Olympic Park because we have to look at the bird's nest, which I don't think there it is. What is this? Temple? It's not. Is there a temple in the bird's nest? Do you think? I don't think that's there. It has been so exhausting trying to look on Google Earth. The Aquatic Center, I can believe that. Why are all of the toilets tagged? Why would you do this? We have to look at the bird's nest. The parking lot is tagged. Also, a lot of these just don't have pictures. The McDonald's is tagged. Is there even a McDonald's there? Do you think there's a McDonald's there? Maybe under all those trees. That's a tiny McDonald's. I don't know. So let's look at the park. Then maybe we'll see bird's nest pictures here. Yep. So you can see why it's called the bird's nest. It is just a beautiful mishmash of just, look at this, all lit up. Isn't that pretty? Of all of this design. And it looks like a bird's nest. I think it's a really beautiful structure. From the aerial shot of the inside. And yeah, this is where the Olympics were hosted. Oh, that's a neat statue. Little map there of the entire Olympic area. And yeah, really remarkable place. Oh, that's really interesting. Wow, it's a human form. Can you see it? Wow, that's a cool statue. Very Picasso-esque. All right. I think next we're going to check out Peking Man, and I have him saved there because, yeah, I knew I was going to get lost, and also because it's geotagged wrong. The museum is right here. This is the museum we're going to look at. It's geotagged over here. Cool, I guess. So these here were the hills where Peking Man and our very early ancestors would have lived in the caves here along this river. You can see ancient site right there. But we're going to look at the museum so we can see the one and only. There's what he would have looked like. Some statues depicting him. Peking Man. One of the more famous fossils. That's not him. There's a cat of some kind. Maybe this is the wrong slideshow. What is that? It's neat, but I don't know what it is. Graveyard there, some caves. See, there's the museum from the outside. Okay, maybe we have to look at this. Nope, there's no pictures tagged there. Ugh. The parking lot's tagged. Driving me crazy. That's a mountain villa. Yeah, it has been a trip trying to explore this place. Alright, I guess there is not a picture of the actual skull, unless one of those was one that we saw before. But he would have looked like that, you know, with that brow bone ridge. He's much shorter and squatter. Lots of human parts to him, but not quite there yet, right? Alright, I'm saving the best for last. We are going to check out, and I think I need to type it in again. Let's see, Great Wall. Oh, I saved the toll gate. Here we go. Get blurry. So not me looking around being like, where is it? Where's the Great Wall? Not realizing that it's in plain sight here. Okay, maybe not there. Oh, that's why, because it's on the hillside. Do you see it snaking around? Now we can see it. The Great Wall of China, coming all around the hills here. Isn't that spectacular? Look at it. It is like one long snake going along here. I mean, I've always wanted to come to the Great Wall, but now I like seeing this perspective. I have to. I have to visit this place. This is a must. I was talking to my family member. I was like, did you see the Great Wall when you were there? She's like, oh yeah, of course I did. Like, oh, I gotta do it. And of course you can walk around. It's very, very hilly. Bring some really good walking shoes from what I've heard, because there's a lot of uphill to get there. There's some, you know, little transportation ways to get you up there. But you know, they didn't have those back in the ancient times, so they built stairs. And she was saying how some of the stairs are not quite even, and it's a trip to get up, but it's well worth it. Let's look at this. And there's lots of tourist stuff in this town as well, because people come here for the wall. So they try to build other little tourist traps. But I kind of like tourist trap places. I think they're funny. But this is where we're going to end it for tonight. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy this style of content, please consider subscribing, as this is an ongoing series on my channel. See, there's a little, I've blanked on the name, the little lift to get you up. This is an ongoing series on my channel, and next we're actually going to another capital city. 2 capital cities in a row. Can you guess what city it is? Let me know down in the comments if you figured it out. Your hint is that I'm going in alphabetical order of every region of the world. So, let's see if you can figure it out. If you enjoyed this style of content, look at this. Wow. If you enjoyed this style of content, I already said that part. Please consider subscribing. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and let me know down in the comments any cool facts that you learned about Beijing. I would love to read them. I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a good cable car. Thank you, my goodness. A good night. Wait, there's a museum. Let's look at this real quick. Wow. Good night. Good night. Good night. Good
it's still so pretty. And there's lots of different tacks on the Great Wall, and they're actually tacked